The cook who became a ghost. The 79-year-old sniper who saved his regiment Hook. He was the last person anyone expected. Not the sharp-eyed young scout, not the hardened infantry sergeant, but a man whose hands usually smelled of grease and burnt coffee. When the general's voice boomed across the desperate, frozen bunker, asking for a volunteer, a sniper to eliminate an enemy machine gun nest that was bleeding their regiment dry, the silence that followed felt thicker than the snow outside. Then, a slow, scraping sound cut through the tension. Every head turned as 79-year-old Walter Wally Jenkins, the company cook, stood up, his joints popping like small arms fire. He wasn't just a cook. He was about to become the deadliest shadow on the battlefield, and the price he paid would echo for decades. This is the story of a forgotten hero, a testament to the fact that courage has no expiration date. And what happened next will change how you view sacrifice forever. Script. The air in the command bunker was a stale mix of sweat, fear, and weak coffee. Outside, the world was a swirling, white hellscape, the unforgiving European winter of 1944. For 3 agonizing days, Charlie Company had been pinned down. It wasn't the artillery that was killing them. It was the rhythmic, relentless chatter of a single, well-placed German MG-42 machine gun nestled high in a stone farmhouse chimney, a position that granted a complete, devastating view of their only supply route. General Marshall, his face etched with exhaustion and defeat, slammed his fist onto the map table. "We need a miracle," he rasped, his eyes sweeping the few remaining officers. "I need a volunteer. Someone who can get past their forward screen and silence that gun. A sniper. It's a suicide run, but we are out of options. Who's it going to be?" The silence that followed was a crushing weight. No one moved. The mission was a death sentence. That's when the kitchen door swung open, and Wally shuffled in, carrying a pot of lukewarm sludge that was supposed to be stew. He was tiny, stooped, and wore thick glasses perpetually fogged from the heat of the field kitchen. He looked more like a friendly gnome than a soldier. But in his hands, instead of a ladle, he carried a gleaming, almost antique Springfield rifle, a rifle that looked far too big for his frame. He set the stew down, looked Marshall dead in the eye, and spoke in a voice that was surprisingly steady, a voice that carried the weight of a lifetime. "I'll do it, General." How could a cook, a man old enough to be their grandfather, possibly succeed where trained men would fail? Everyone thought he was joking. Major Henderson actually snorted, a laugh cut short by Marshall's piercing glare. "Jenkins, that's insane. You're the cook. You haven't fired a shot in anger since the last drill 6 months ago." Wally just nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "Major, you forget. I wasn't always a cook. Before this war, and before the last one, I was a sharpshooter. The kind that gets paid by the deer, not the hour. And before that, well, let's just say a man doesn't forget how to breathe or how to line up a shot." The general stared at him, seeing past the apron and the tremor in his hands, searching for a ghost of the man Wally claimed to be. There was a raw, undeniable conviction in his gaze. Marshall made a choice that felt like tearing up the rulebook. He gave the order. Wally was given just 3 hours to prepare. He shed his kitchen whites, trading them for snow-camouflaged fatigues that hung loose on his frail frame. The younger soldiers watched, mesmerized, as he meticulously cleaned his old Springfield, running a cloth down the barrel with the care a father gives a sleeping child. He didn't take much: a pouch of dried rations, a handful of old, heavy-grain ammunition, and a compass. He paused at the doorway, turning back to the young Private Miller, who was shivering by the stove. "Tell the boys," Wally whispered, a soft smile touching his lips, "that dinner will be late, but it'll be served. Count on it." That promise, a simple statement about dinner, became the only lifeline of hope the entire regiment had left to cling to. The mission required him to move across 1,000 yards of exposed, rolling farmland, a wasteland covered in 6 inches of fresh, Unforgiving snow. Wally moved with a bizarre, almost unbelievable grace. He didn't run or crawl like the younger men. He seemed to dissolve into the landscape, a natural part of the frozen earth. His years as a hunter, perhaps even his age, had gifted him a patience that transcended military training. He moved only when the MG-42 was firing, the sound masking the crunch of his boots. The young German spotters scanning the field saw nothing but the wind whipping the snow. Wally became a ghost, guided not by adrenaline, but by a quiet, burning sense of duty that only a man who has seen too much war can possess. Hours bled into one another. The cold was a constant, vicious enemy, stealing the feeling from his fingers, trying to turn his old joints into stone. But he pushed through, fueled by the memory of the young men whose blood had stained the snow near the supply depot, boys he had cooked for, boys he had promised dinner to. Finally, he reached the predetermined staging point, the shattered remains of a stone wall, maybe 250 yards from the farmhouse. The machine gun position was now clearly visible, spitting fire from the small gap in the chimney. He had faced the elements and the enemy screen, but the true test of his long-dormant skill was still ahead. The single, impossible shot that he lay prone in the snow, the ice crystals digging into his cheek. The sound of the MG-42 was deafeningly close now. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat, a sound that meant death. His breath plumed out in white clouds, obscuring his vision. Wally took off his glasses, knowing the fog would ruin the shot. His old eyes, though weak for reading, were still perfect for distance, honed over decades of hunting in the wide-open spaces of his home state. He waited. He ignored the shivering of his body, forcing his core to be still, letting the heavy rifle become an extension of his own will. He calculated the wind, a sharp cross breeze, the slight uphill trajectory, and the enemy gunner's predictable rhythm of fire. He didn't rush. He simply waited for the gap, the infinitesimal moment when the gunner would pause to change belts. The gun sputtered, then stopped. Click, click. The sound of a fresh belt being fed into the mechanism. That was his window. Wally exhaled slowly, pulling every last bit of air from his lungs, achieving that perfect, suspended stillness. His finger, crooked from old age and arthritis, tightened on the trigger. He saw the black profile of the German gunner lean slightly to adjust the belt, his head perfectly framed in the chimney opening. Wally didn't feel the recoil. He didn't hear the single, deafening crack of the Springfield. The only thing he registered was the sight picture holding true. He saw the puff of stone dust where the bullet hit. And then, the sound of the MG-42, the relentless, death-bringing chatter, stopped. Immediately. Forever. A single bullet from a 79-year-old cook had just changed the fate of 1,000 men. But the story was far from over. A full minute passed in absolute silence. Back in the bunker, the men waited, their hearts in their throats. Then, a cheer erupted, a raw, joyous cry of relief. The general knew. Wally had done it. They secured the supply route and, within the hour, began their counterattack, successfully pushing the enemy back. When they reached the farmhouse, they found the German gunner slumped over his weapon, killed instantly by a near-impossible headshot. But there was no sign of Wally. They searched the field, following his single set of tracks back to the stone wall, and then beyond. They finally found him about 100 yards past his firing position, lying curled in the snow, the antique Springfield resting beside him. He hadn't been killed by the enemy. Wally Jenkins, the 79-year-old cook who had saved their lives, had succumbed to the relentless cold and sheer exhaustion immediately after taking the shot. He died not as a cook, but as a hero, a master of his craft who used his final strength for others. They carried him back, not on a stretcher, but on the shoulders of the regiment's youngest men. They never found out if he had another round in his pouch, or if that single, perfect shot was literally the last thing he had left. The general gave the eulogy himself, a man choking back tears. Wally's self-sacrificial act became legendary, a whispered tale among the veterans. The story of the day the cook served up a final, definitive dish of courage. The regiment never forgot him, and every night, before the men ate, a piece of bread was silently set aside for the old cook who ensured they would live to eat another meal. His body was frail, but his spirit was granite. And the echoes of that one, quiet rifle shot continue to remind us that true heroes are often the ones you least expect, living right next to you, perhaps even cooking your dinner.